Hello and welcome to the Responsive Family Sleep Podcast. I'm your host, Kim Hawley, holistic sleep coach, lactation consultant, peaceful parenting educator, and mom. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by all the conflicting sleep info, frustrated with sleep information that just plain felt wrong, or searched desperately for a truly gentle and responsive sleep approach, then you are in the right place. In each episode, we'll be answering your most pressing baby and toddler sleep questions, busting those sleep myths, and helping you understand truly developmental, biologically normal baby and toddler sleep, plus encouraging you to trust your intuition along the way. Let's get started. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. It is World Breastfeeding Week. It is National Breastfeeding Month here in the US. So I figured it's time to revisit the topic of sleep information, advice, recommendations, and the impact on your milk supply, right? Before I jump into that, I just want to do a quick logistics announcement. I am taking the rest of August off of the podcast, so the next time you will see a new episode from me will be September. There won't be any episodes coming out. If you've been listening for a while, I know last summer I did this a bit differently and did some from the archives episode. This time it's only 3 weeks. I'm just taking a break. I'm taking the time to spend with my kiddos this summer, to work a little bit less this summer, and to give my brain a break to really, come back fresh with podcasts, episode ideas for the fall. So I'm excited. If you do want to hear something specific in the fall, if you have an idea for a podcast episode, please reach out. I would love to hear from you. Best way for me is email to really get on my radar. So you can email me, kim@intuitiveparentingdc.com, and I'd love to hear from you. So, sleep information, right? It can be hugely problematic to breastfeeding, nursing, lactating parents. Why is that? Lots of reasons. So first, sleep information came from early pediatrics and early ideas of sleep training, and it was never about supporting normal infant sleep patterns or normal lactation patterns. So it evolved completely separate from supporting supply. And that means that a lot of what is considered the norm in healthy sleep habits or, go-to sleep information or general sleep training advice does not take into account if you are a breastfeeding parent and you want to continue breastfeeding. That wasn't what it was designed to do, right? The second big problem is that we, as a general rule, do not train our perinatal professionals on normal lactation patterns, maintaining supply, or normal infant sleep and feeding patterns. So that means you may or may not have a pediatrician who is knowledgeable. You may or may not have a therapist who is knowledgeable. Your OT, PT, whoever you're talking to may or may not be knowledgeable. And for sure, you have a higher likelihood of having your sleep coach not be knowledgeable if you are not seeking out a sleep coach with a lactation credential and who is explicitly saying their goal is to support your feeding goals, your breastfeeding goals, your supply, right? Because remember, sleep coaches come from that sort of mainstream sleep world. And I mean, I'm a sleep coach. I'm an IBCLC. There are actually way more of us now than there used to be. So I want to acknowledge that. There are a lot more of us, but we're still the minority. And the general sleep coaching, sleep consulting world is still not trained on lactation. Or they had a very brief training without a lot of lactation-specific experience. So if your goal is to improve sleep and continue breastfeeding, it is a good idea to do a little research, ask some questions, kind of do your homework on the source or the person who's giving you that sleep information. Because I don't want you to be one of the parents who comes to me and says, my supply dropped significantly after working with this sleep coach or reading this sleep book, right? Or following this sleep program, because it happens. It really does. And it breaks my heart. It really breaks my heart. So, how do we know if that information is lactation supportive or going to undermine your supply? Sometimes it's super obvious, right? Sometimes it's more subtle. And the more subtle stuff might be okay with someone with a really robust supply, maybe more problematic if you have just enough, or you're working really hard to maximize the amount of breast milk you can give your baby, right? So, biggest red flags to me, this is certainly not comprehensive, hopefully I won't forget one. Biggest red flags to me are blaming all sleep problems on breastfeeding, right? So things like nursing to sleep is a bad habit. It's because you feed them at night, right? Like it's because you haven't separated feeding from sleep enough. That kind of stuff is a huge red flag that we are just not understanding normal sleep and feeding patterns, right? Things like requiring or strongly recommending or saying we can't make any improvement without night weaning. And this is true whether we're talking about babies or toddlers, because I have helped a lot of toddler parents improve sleep without night weaning. I also help lots of people night wean their toddlers, right? It's totally fine to want to do it, but saying that you can't or you like make an improvement or you have to, that's a problem. Now, when we get down to babies, this becomes even more problematic, right? Because this is where the night weaning tanks supply. So saying things like older babies don't need night feeds, right? That's a big problem because most older babies do need night feeds, and most lactating parents in the first year need a nighttime milk removal in order to maintain supply. So those are two different things, right? We can stop feeding baby overnight but still remove milk, but we actually have to explore that. And it's still not necessarily the best idea to purposefully not feed your baby overnight. Really rigid feeding schedules, stretching feeds during the day because that's somehow magically going to help them feed less at night. Like that doesn't even make sense, right? If we're feeding less during the day, we need to feed more overnight to balance it out, right? Because breastfeeding isn't bottles, right? We can't just give bigger and bigger bottles to decrease the number of bottles. Now, I don't think that is necessarily always the healthiest approach to bottle feeding either. As many bottle feeding parents who've worked with me say, I encourage more physiological feeding patterns. But breastfeeding just does not work like that. It's not how the glandular tissue in the breast works. So stretching feeds, really rigid feeding, very prescribed feeding, those are big red flags to me, right? Because it is okay for an older baby to decrease the number of night feeds. We can do that, but we can't just ignore the fact that going too long overnight can drop your supply, or decreasing the number of feeds in 24 hours too much can, below a certain level, can decrease your supply. Like it will, both of those will at some point. Where that point is, right, that's where it varies from parent to parent. Honestly, eat, play, sleep routines, when they are required, strongly recommended, are a bit of a lower key red flag to me. It's not that they're inherently wrong, but when we're too rigid about them, we are not feeding our baby based on their cues, right? We're not doing responsive feeding, which is what is optimal. Because especially young babies, right? They eat a lot and they feed and they sleep a lot. So those two should intersect at least some of the time. Doesn't mean we have to feed to sleep all the time, but if we're never feeding to sleep, then we are not responsively feeding, most likely, right? Of course, exceptions to babies with extreme reflux and all that stuff, right? So that to me is a red flag. Essentially, anything where someone doesn't have a feeding background, isn't looking at your feeding history or your feeding goals before telling you to do something with your feeding rhythms, anyone who is blaming everything on lactation, on breastfeeding, anyone who is asking you to go really long stretches without a better understanding of how that's going to impact your supply, these are problems, right? These are problems. These are not lactation supportive information, especially when they want you to move quickly, right? Big shifts in feeding patterns are much more likely to cause big supply drops rather than a more thoughtful and gradual shift. So what does that leave you, right? Sleep information needs to be lactation informed if you want to keep nursing. if you want to keep your breastfeeding relationship going, you want your breastfeeding goals in mind. We have to think about the broader principles of lactation, but also just what is your individual story, journey, and goals. And that matters. So, it's okay to reach out to an IBCLC and see if they are knowledgeable about some sleep strategy you're trying to implement and maybe help you think through the potential impact on your supply, right? There's lots of, like I said, us out there like me who have both backgrounds and would love to help you kind of think through that, talk through that, make sure you're making uninformed choice. That's really what it comes down to. It's okay to say, I want to change my feeding goals and try that sleep strategy, but it just needs to be an informed choice. So often it's not happening. So look at those credentials, do some investigating, ask the questions, really think it through. And I hope this, brings some of those ways that the sleep world doesn't understand lactation a little bit more front and center for you, so that you can ignore the information that blames sleep issues on breastfeeding, and ignore the information that potentially can have a negative impact on your supply. Thank you for joining me today. I hope this episode left you feeling more informed, confident, and encouraged on your sleep journey. And just a reminder before you go that nothing in this episode is individualized to your specific sleep situation, nor is it to be taken as medical advice. Take what resonates, ignore what doesn't, and check with your healthcare provider about any medical concerns. Take a moment to subscribe to this podcast so that you'll never miss an episode. And take a moment to rate, review, or share an episode you love on social media. All of that helps parents just like you find me, this podcast, and this gentle and responsive sleep information. I'll see you next time.